Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Now today I've got I think it's going to be a fairly long video. I'm going to be ranking all of the albums I own which came out in 1985. So continuing like this sort of like series I'm doing like of like ranking albums like from like a particular year. I've got a total of 31 albums here. So kind of the purpose of this video, just to like for me to kind of listen to some records which I might have like overlooked like in like my collection, but also like for like you guys to give me like some suggestions for ones like what like I've missed off my list, simply because I don't own them yet, like or like haven't heard like the albums, like any suggestions like for ones to add, like would like be much appreciated, and I'll just get right stuck into the list. At number 31, so my least favourite album from 1985, a relatively new pickup this, so I guess this is a bit subjective, like, but I'm going for an album by the Pogues called Rum, Sodomy and the Lash. Now I know this is one of the more highly acclaimed albums from the year. This will be a controversial picking, but yeah, I recently got this one from my uncle's collection, which he'd left like at like my my grandparents' house, so he had like tons of Smith's records and like Lloyd Cole and like all sorts, and this was kind of like still what was sitting there. So I was like, the Pogues, I know of them, I know that like they're famous, a very famous band, so I thought that I would give this a try. It's produced by Elvis Costello, so it has a lot going for it, but I wasn't a fan personally. Shane MacGowan's vocal, I kind of knew what to expect, but it was kind of as bad as I thought it was going to be. It wasn't really my thing. I mean, it might grow on me, so it's very kind of Celtic kind of folk like influences on there, but also kind of delivered with a kind of sort of like punk like attitude to it, not one like I was particularly fond of, unfortunately. Okay, next one up now at number 30, I've got an album by Godley and Creme. This is called The History Mix Volume 1. So this is a very odd album. Like initially I thought, well this is the UK version, and then this is a version from America here. Now I initially thought that these were two completely separate albums, but like as it turns out, or Volume 1, Volume 2 perhaps, because it turns out they're both Volume 1, and it's essentially on like the original sort of like UK version, it's kind of like remixes of like their earlier work, like some solos, some stuff like from like 10cc, so it's quite a pioneering album like in like that regard, sort of in terms of, like it's using a lot of like sampling and kind of like sort of like taking like their work in 10cc and like earlier and kind of rejigging it and like kind of like doing something like new like and a bit different with it. So I suppose like in like that regard, like it's quite forward thinking, but it's not really like all that great, to be honest, like in like my opinion. But the other thing with this album is it's got the single "Cry" on it, like probably like their most popular song, got a classic kind of like music video to it, and like that's on this album like as well, which is a really great song. And probably like my favourite bit of it off like the album is they've kind of got a sample from I'm Not in Love, like the Be Quiet Big Boys Don't Cry line, that then sieges into Cry. Like that's quite clever, like and like raised a smile like on like my part, like, but yeah, it's just not a record like I would ever really go back to, but what they did with the US version was on the second side they put on 4 older Godley and Creme songs, so like songs from like their previous album, so you actually like only get half the album like with like the American version. So all around a pretty strange record. I mean, like it's quite fun for kind of like the curious 10cc fan, but really beyond that there's not an awful lot on there worth returning to. Okay, next up now I've got an album by Squeeze. So this is Cozy Fan Tutti Frutti, number 29 on my list. Now this was intended as a bit of a comeback album like for Squeeze. So they had originally broken up in 1982 after their previous album Sweets from a Stranger, and so they essentially split up. Difford and Tilbrook made an album together, which is by all intents and purposes a Squeeze album. Like I think today, they are like the two original members, the two like only members remaining like of Squeeze, and like they call themselves Squeeze like to this day. So it's that Difford and Tilbrook album is just a Squeeze album basically, but then like the whole band reformed like on this album, so like including Jules Holland like as well, is on here, but this is just very generic, very 80s sounding, very bombastic sort of production, but just lacking the songwriting prowess like of of like their previous work. I mean, there's nothing terrible on here, but it's just very average and very boring. So yeah, for me, yeah, number 29 for Squeeze and Cozy Fan Tutti Frutti. Okay, next one up now, another choice which I think is going to be a bit controversial, considering like how like low it is, because I think this was the best-selling album like from like '85, but I'm going to give it to Dire Straits and Brothers in Arms. So yeah, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of Dire Straits. I bought these albums years ago when I was a bit more into them, but I've kind of grown a bit bored of them, like, to like be honest, but this is definitely one of their better albums, I would say. I mean, you've got a couple of really great songs. Like, I do love the opening track, So Far Away, is really nice, just got a great like calming like atmosphere. I've never been a big fan of Money for Nothing. Walk of Life is a good bit of cheesy fun, I guess, but then there's not a lot of other like material like on here like which I like really like go back to. So yeah, number 28 is what Dire Straits and Brothers in Arms gets. Okay, next up is another pickup which I don't believe I've shown on a vinyl update video yet, but it is a Scritti Gritti and Cupid and Psyche 85. So yeah, Scritti Gritti, like, they're kind of a band who are kind of bundled into like kind of like the sophisti-pop kind of genre, along with kind of like Prefab Sprout kind of thing. So I was kind of maybe expecting that, but this is very different. Very, I mean, the singer's got a very like unique voice, like he's called like Green Gartside. Very, yeah, like I've not heard a singer like him, to be honest. And I guess that's what makes the album a bit interesting, but also is what maybe makes it great, like a little bit. And it's just, yeah, it is just a very poppy album. I mean, it's not what I would necessarily go back to too often, but yeah, it was relatively enjoyable. So yeah, number 27 for Scritti Gritti. Okay, let's look now at number 26. I've got an album by The Long Riders. This is called A State of Our Union. The Long Riders are an American kind of like part of like the Paisley Underground kind of scene, so kind of like revival like of the kind of 60s kind of bands and kind of sounds and that. These guys are essentially a kind of Birds tribute band, to like be honest, like with your very kind of similar sort of like that sort of jangle and kind of country twang like to like their like music. I mean, this is a good imitation like of that sound, but there are some really good songs like Looking Like for Lewis and Clark, and I think I quite liked Here Comes That Train Again, but yeah, just with this album, it does sound very inauthentic. You know, it sounds like they're trying too hard to kind of imitate a sound, and it just doesn't feel like it kind of comes from a kind of like an authentic place. Like, to be honest, it just feels like they kind of are sort of like paying tribute kind of thing, like to like kind of like the Birds, like without really putting like their own kind of heart and soul like into it. So that's kind of like what like lets this one down. But it's a good listen. Like, the songs are good, but yeah, it's just not one which I necessarily really connect with too much. Okay, next up now, number 25 is one which I actually, when I was making this list and kind of listening to like all these albums again, found myself enjoying a lot more than I thought I would. So it's the Icicle Works, and the album is The Small Price of a Bicycle. So if you've watched my video which I did on 1990 albums, like their album from that year, Permanent Damage, came dead last. I didn't like it at all, and I was almost expecting this to be kind of similar, to be honest, but this was decent. I mean, it wasn't brilliant. I mean, I would say none of the songs like are particularly stand out to me, but it is a good album. A lot of jangly guitars like on here, like again, but yeah, definitely like a step down in terms like of like I'd like the song quality, but overall half decent. So that one comes in at number 25. Okay, now number 24 is an album which I must confess I'd never actually played until I was compiling like this video. I know it's terrible, but it's a Pete Townsend solo album called White City, which comes in at number 24. So I was expecting with this album, because it's called White City, a novel, and I think it was kind of tied into kind of like a book or a kind of TV sort of documentary film or something. Like, I was expecting a very pretentious kind of concept album about about like God knows what, like, but this is actually quite good. It's actually, I was very pleasantly surprised. Musically, it's very diverse, and I really like a lot of the songs. Like the first two tracks, Give Blood and Brilliant Blues, are really great, and Secondhand Love is also like a lot of fun. Even though Pete Townsend isn't considered one of the best singers like in the world, I thought like this was a very rewarding listen here. So a pleasant surprise, this one. Would say though, I'm not a big fan of the single or like the main single, Face to Face. Didn't like that song, but really most of the other material was rather good. So yeah, a pleasant surprise. A pleasant surprise, this one. Pete Townsend and White City at number 24. Okay, next up now, number 23 is another one by a kind of Paisley Underground band. This is the 3 O'Clock, and this is their album Arrive Without Travelling, which I believe is their second or third album. I'm not 100% sure, but it certainly came after their kind of magnum opus 16 Tambourines, which is a brilliant record. This one perhaps loses a little bit off the charm and whimsical nature off that debut, but they replace that with a slightly harder edge and slightly more full and kind of beefy songs. But I think it really works, and again, that was a really great fun listen, a fun album here all round. Quite like this one as well, the 3 O'Clock, Arrive Without Travelling. Okay, next one, number 22, I've got an album by a band called The Pale Fountains. These are a kind of British indie band from Liverpool. This was the second album of theirs and their last album as well. They only had the 2 albums, and I mean, there was, for me, Pale Fountains, a lot of lost potential with them. Neither of their 2 albums are brilliant, they're good, they've got some good songs on them, but this record, it just seems particularly confused a little bit. It's there's a lot of different variety on here. Some of the tracks are very bombastic and very they've got lots of kind of shrieking backing vocals on them, thinking things like Bicycle Thieves and Bruised Arcade in particular. But what kind of nudges this album up the list a bit is one particular track, which is called A Jean's Not Happening, which I think is a lost 80s gem. It's a brilliant song, and I think it was a single, but it should have been at least a top 10 single. I think it's just absolutely glorious. So it's really that song what carries this album, to be honest. I mean, there's other half decent stuff, but yeah, I think that Jesus Happening, classic track, from an overall slightly patchy album. Okay, next up is one I originally had a lot lower on my list, but through the course of listening to all these albums again, slowly made its way up the list a little bit. It's by Stephen Tintin Duffy, and this is called The Ups and Downs. Now, Stephen Duffy would go on to form The Lilac Time, who have now become one of my favourite bands. I've not got a bad word to say about The Lilac Time, but Stephen Duffy himself had a very interesting career kind of prior to that. He was a founding member of Duran Duran, but left before they found commercial success, and then kind of released a couple of singles himself under the name Tintin, but then this was his his debut album where he became Stephen Tintin Duffy, and at first I thought this was a rather generic 80s pop album, but the more I listened to it, there's some really good songs on here. It has got his hit Kiss Me on it, which was a number 4 hit in the UK, but then there's other great tracks like She Makes Me Quiver and A Masterpiece are really good, and Wednesday Jones is a very nice sort of gentle track, very almost a kind of precursor to the Lilac Times. I mean, bits of it have dated, but I thought all round that this was a really good album here, so that one comes in at number 21. Okay, now this one I think will be the most controversial placing on the list, just considering how low I've got it, because I think most people, again, would have this as a kind of top 5 or top 10 album from the year, but at number 20 for me, it's going to Tears for Fears and Song from the Big Chair. Yes, I know. I mean, this is considered, again, a classic album. I think probably after Brothers in Arms is probably the second best-selling album, from 85. But yeah, for me, it's just a bit overrated. I think that a lot of the tracks are just not particularly interesting. I mean, it has got Everybody Wants to Rule the World in it, which is great, and Head Over Heels is another brilliant single. But aside from that, I've never been a fan of Shout. I think it goes on for far too long, it's just far too repetitive. The Working Hour is alright, but Mother's Talk, again, I never liked. I Believe is just really dreary, and Listen Again, I can't even remember what that one goes like. So it's just a very short album. There's only 8 tracks on it, but they all seem to, aside from the couple I mentioned there, like what I like, they all just feel like they go on for too long, and it's just a bit boring for me. So yeah, number 20 for Tears for Fears, and yeah, it is like the two tracks, like Everybody Wants to Rule the World and like head over heels, what kind of like bump this album like up the list like a fair bit. Okay, next up now, slightly more obscure from Tears for Fears. It's a band called Game Theory. This is an album called Real Nighttime. Now, Game Theory are kind of, I don't know if it's called like a jangle pop band, but they're very much like they've got a good kind of like sort of jangle to them, but slightly artsier and slightly kind of a bit cleverer kind of edge to them, you know, like the kind of songwriting is very schizophrenic, and it's kind of got it's very intriguing songs, like I would say, like from like all written like by like the frontman like Scott Miller. Like they had a couple of albums. This was, I believe, their second full-length album, and this has been described as a loose song cycle following a young man's journey from romantic bliss to soul-crushing disappointment. I mean, I just thought it was a collection of like rather decent tracks, like, to like be honest with you. It's also got quite a refreshing production on it. It was produced by Mitch Easter, who had produced REM's first album, but this is a lot more kind of rawer and slightly rougher, like sort of like production, like to like anything like REM like ever did. But no, really good records here. Yeah, Game Theory, Real Nighttime. Next up now, an album which again I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I did initially. It's by a band called Felt, and this is an album called Ignite the Seven Cannons. This comes in at number 18 on my list. Now, this is a very, I guess, a uniform sounding album, you know, like a lot of the tracks do sound similar, and kind of it all kind of melds into one sort of sound. So it's produced by like Robin Guthrie of the like the Cocteau Twins, but again, it's got a great sound to it. All the guitars all drenched in reverb and that, but there's some great pop songs on it as well, like The Day the Rain Came Down, like, is like really great. And what's the opening track called? The Darkest Light Will Shine. Again, these titles are very difficult to read, but they're all very kind of short, sharp, kind of like poppy songs, but just delivered like really well. You've also got the track Primitive Painter, which is a duet with Elizabeth Fraser, also from like Cocteau Twins. I mean, vocally, like a little bit weak. It's like kind of like the lead singer, like off like Felt, Lawrence, was never a particularly great vocalist, but this is an absolute treat musically, like I thought. So yeah, Felt, Ignite the Seven Cannons, yeah, will come in at number 18. Okay, next up is not really a proper album, but I had to find a playset for it, like on like this list, considering they are one of my favourite bands. But it is the Dukes of Stratosphere, aka XTC, with 25 O'Clock here. So this year, like I said, it's technically not a proper album because there's only 6 tracks on here, but it's also kind of too many for like an EP or single either, so I am including it like on like this list. And this is the Dukes of Stratosphere was like XTC's like alter ego band, where they would very much pay homage to the kind of psychedelic pop like they grew up on and like loved. And there's some really great tracks on here. Like, yes, it is a kind of like sort of like imitation sort of thing, but it's done so well, and like with like the songwriting quality like of Andy Partridge, like, and Colin Moulding, like they do a great job of it. So like my particular favourites are like What in the World, Your Gold Dress, and Mole from the Ministry. All of those are really, really, really great like songs. Like, so yeah, I just wish that there was maybe a few more tracks like on here, then I possibly could have even put it slightly higher. Next up now, again an album which I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I did, at number 16. It's by Rain Parade, and this is a Crashing Dream. So again, another one of these Paisley Underground bands. Now their debut album, Emergency Third Rail Power Trip, is my favourite album from 1983. But this one is definitely a step down. So they lost their principal songwriter, David Robrack. There were 2 brothers, like David and Steve Robrack. Steve stuck around for this one, but David went off and left, I think, and then formed a band like Mazzy Star like afterwards. But there's some really strong tracks on here though. I think my favourite was Depending on You. Just like a very majestic kind of song, you know, like these are very anthemic tracks, quite slow in places, but just very progressive and just really, really, really good stuff. So, Crashing Dream by Rain Parade would be my number 16. Okay, let's look now at number 15. I've got an album by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. This is Southern Accents here. So this isn't one of Tom Petty's more highly regarded albums because it is a little bit unfocused in places. So it's kind of like, on the one hand, like he was trying to make a kind of return to like his roots, kind of Southern American kind of album, like with kind of like these, like more like narrative-based songs, like around like different characters and that. So like, you get some of those like on things like Rebels and Southern Accents itself, and Spike and Dogs on the Run, or kind of those kind of songs. But then he's also then working with very contemporary producers. So he's got Dave Stewart like producing like some of the tracks, things like the single "Don't Come Around Here No More" and Make It Better, Forget About Me. So kind of like these two things combined make this a slightly messy and unfocused album. But what makes this strong is the actual quality like of like the songs themselves. Like tracks like those like all like the songs I mentioned are really, really good, like top tier Tom Petty songs. I mean, there's a couple towards the end which are not so good. Spike I'm not a big fan of, and Mary's New Car again isn't great. But aside from that, this is a really good record. So we're coming at number 15 for me. Okay, next up now was again another surprise one like on my list, one which I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would. It's by a band who like I'm not massively familiar with, like with like a lot of like their other work, but I just really enjoyed this record. It's Del Amici's debut, a self-titled debut here, number 14, and yeah, I just really like this. I think it's a bit more compared to the other album I have of theirs, Waking Hours. This is a bit more messy and a little bit more certainly like less polished than their later efforts. But for me, this album just sounds absolutely timeless. You can imagine a band releasing this today kind of thing. You know, it doesn't sound dated at all. It's got kind of, and I think that's due to its more like acoustic, like instruments like on here. Like I don't think there's a single synthesizer like on like this album. Like on like where there is, it's used like very tastefully. And I think really timeless album. Some really great songs like on here. Like great songwriting. I think at the time, Justin Cunningham was being compared to the likes of like Elvis Costello and kind of like XTC and that in terms of coming up with great kind of like thought-provoking like lyrics. I mean, I guess he maybe lose that a little bit as his career went on, or like that reputation as the career his career went on. But no, this is a very strong album here though. Yeah, really underrated record. Okay, let's look at number 13 here. So this is Talking Heads, and this is Little Creatures here. So this was one of the first Talking Heads albums I got. I think this definitely was the first. It was one from my uncle's collection, and this was very much for them an embrace of the mainstream. They'd be kind of hinting at it a bit on Speaking in Tongues, and then they'd had their massive world tour, like the massive Stop Making Sense tour, and then they kind of continued the momentum with this album, which is easily their most commercial record. But I think there's some great tracks on here, all through the album. You've got great singles like And She Was, and then finishing that with Road to Nowhere. But some other great tracks like Creatures of Love, and The Lady Don't Mind, Stay Up Late's really fun, Television Man. So there's a lot of fantastic stuff on this album. Maybe lacks the quirkiness of previous work, but and maybe doesn't feel like a Talking Heads album. But I think that's what makes this rather refreshing, I guess, compared to some of their other work. So yeah, Little Creatures here, great record, and we're coming at number 13. Okay, let's start now at number 12. I've got an album by the Waterboys. So this is the Sea. So this is a great record here. Very big bombastic production, but really good songs of substance to kind of back it up. A couple of incredible songs like Don't Bang the Drums, fantastic opener. The Whole of the Moon is again one of the songs of the year for me, and then the closing track, This Is the Sea, is just absolutely stunning piece of work. So number 12 would be the Waterboys. Okay, number 11 now, an album which I've recently reviewed on my channel. So it's China Crisis and Flaunt the Imperfection I've got at number 11. So this is expertly produced by Steely Dan's Walter Becker, but it manages to combine being both a very fun and upbeat album, quite danceable, gets you out your toe tapping, but also you can just sit back and appreciate the kind of like the sonic craft like of this. It's incredibly well produced, and the songs, and particularly towards the end like of the album, tracks like The Bigger the Punch I'm Feeling, World Spins I'm Part of It, and Gift of Freedom are very intricate and like really like masterful songs. So yeah, like a great sort of like like almost like multi-purpose album here, like in like many ways, like by China Crisis at number 11. Okay, let's stop now at number 10. I've got The Smiths and Meat is Murder. So I would say off the bat, this is probably my least favourite Smiths album out of the 4 kind of like official studio albums they put out. But it's still a great album though. I mean, like compared to like some of like the ones that we've had like in like the list like so far, you've got things like The Headmaster's Ritual to kick it off. What She Said is a good rocker, and then Nowhere and then like look like the second side, Nowhere Fast. Well I Wonder has always been one of my favourite Smith songs, and then Barbarism Begins at Home with that kind of like that fantastic kind of like groovy bass line like on it. Again, very different like from like the Smiths, but like in other places like on this album, there's tracks which feel a bit generic by Smith standards. Like I Want the One I Can't Have is a very generic Smith song, never been a favourite, and then the closing track, Meat is Murder itself, is I think objectively considered one of the Smiths' worst songs. So a little bit patchy by Smith standards, but when this album is good, you almost like can't get better than it. So that's Meat is Murder by the Smiths. Okay, next one now is New Order, and it is their album Low Life at number 9. So this is a really great New Order album for me. I think it is a little bit off a step down compared to Power Corruption and Lies, but there's some great tracks, and they are expanding their sound a little bit. They're kind of edging a little bit more towards the kind of like the dancey sound and like the dance and like the full-on dance sort of sound like they would kind of like go on like to like pioneer. But there's some great tracks, like The Perfect Kiss is like one of like their best singles, and I adore the closing song Face Up, is one of my favourite New Order songs. So all round really great album here at number 9. Number 8, I've got an album by The Colourfield. It's Virgins and Philistines by of course like the late great Terry Hall on here. So this album has some brilliant tracks on it, a lot of songs like which I think like could have even made this album better, like they were putting out, and they had like their kind of self-titled song like The Colourfield like itself, but also a single like a few years later, like a year later, called Things Will Be Beautiful, which is fantastic. But this is still a great record. Like it's got Thinking of You on here. Castles in the Air is just an exquisite song. Take is a lot of fun, and then also their cover of The Roaches and Hammond's song is just absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, for that, like this album would come in at number 8. Okay, next up at number 7, I've got What Does Anything Mean, basically, by the Chameleon. So the Chameleons were kind of Manchester band, a bit gothic, a little bit dark kind of sound to them, but really great though. And this is for me a massive improvement like on like their debut, Script of the Bridge, which I always thought I really liked. But I remember I think they came out in '83 and was on my '83 like album ranking list, and it was quite low. It wasn't a record which like upon like revisiting like I was too fond of, but this is just brilliant. It sounds a lot fuller, but the songs have a lot more character like and like atmosphere like to them. I mean, it's certainly not the most catchy album like in like the world, but it just blows me away like every time I put it on. I just get kind of lost in like kind of like the beautiful textures like on it. Favorite tracks would probably be Perfume Garden, and just trying to think of the other favourites, like On the Beach I think as well, like was like another choice track there. So yeah, at number 7 it's the Chameleons. Okay, that's now at number 6 I have Heyday by The Church. So they were I think an Australian band, if I'm right in saying, like they this is like I think their 3rd or 4th album, 1980, well of course it's 1985, that's what we're doing like this video on. But this is a brilliant record. It's full of great produced songs. They've expanded their sound a little bit, so they're kind of taking in sort of like there's some classical like arrangements like on it, like there's some like strings on here, but it just creates a really wonderful atmosphere and some great like hook laden songs like the opening track Myrrh, Already Yesterday is brilliant, Tantalised, and Youth Worshipper like is like really great as well. So yeah, lots of fantastic stuff on here. Heyday by The Church. Okay, now we're into the top 5. So for me, that starts off with Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, Easy Pieces. So this is their 2nd album, and yeah, this is brilliant stuff like on here. I mean, it is a step down a little bit from Rattlesnakes, but this is still great though. It is Lloyd Cole and Commotion's most commercially successful album, so it's got his two biggest hits on it, Brand New Friend and Lost Weekend, like, are both like on here. But then you've got some brilliant like album tracks. Like the whole off like the first side is just great, and then you've got the singles again like the middle like of the album, and then a couple like of maybe slightly weaker tracks. James like isn't brilliant, but then Perfect Blue to close like is like absolutely stunning like as well. So all round a brilliant record here, like from Lloyd Cole. Will come in at number 5. Okay, number 4, I've got the Style Council's our favourite shop here. So this for me is a great, it's almost like a concept album, this for me. It's very much like the encapsulation of kind of Britain like in like the mid-80s basically. So there's songs on here about like the miners' strike, there's songs on here about people having to sort of go and find work, like Homebreakers, about the kind of like communities kind of getting like sort of like pulled apart, like on like All Gone Away, and kind of like Come to Milton Keynes that kind of has like has like these like similar themes like on it. So it's got this kind of theme around it, like which just sort of like binds it together. And I think you've got some of Weller's really best songwriting like on here. So like as I said, like all those tracks I mentioned, but A Stone's Throw Away is fantastic. Man of Great Promise is again one of his very, very, very best songs, and then to close things off, you've got Walls Come Tumbling Down, again one of the tracks like of the year, and brilliant singles. So yeah, our favourite shop by Style Council would be my number 4 choice. Okay, next up at number 3 is possibly one which I think a lot of people wouldn't have quite as high, but it's always been a real favourite album of mine by this artist. It is The Cure and The Head on the Door. So this is probably The Cure's most commercial album, and I guess by that metric it is probably like my favourite, because a lot of The Cure stuff like is a lot darker and is maybe like not exactly like to like my taste, but this record I think they get the balance just right like on it, like to like be honest with you. I think it's a brilliant collection like of like songs, so starting with like In Between Days and then working through things like 6 Different Ways, and Push has got an incredible guitar riff. You've got Close to Me, again really fun kind of pop song, and then A Night Like This, another real favourite track of mine. So I think this was one where yeah, like The Cure managed to combine a commercial album, like no doubt, but with but like not like shedding any of their artistic like credibility and integrity. So yeah, number 3 for me would be The Head on the Door by The Cure. Okay, at number 2 now I've got Prefab Sprout and Steve McQueen. So this is a stunning album. It's a pristine record, both in terms of its songwriting, which is just on point, and also Thomas Dolby's production on here. They just come hand in hand to make pretty much a masterpiece like off like an album for me. Like every song, maybe apart from Blueberry Pies, is brilliant, and yeah, it's just like that first side I think is one of the best first sides of music like ever like put like to vinyl, like to like be honest with you. It's just fantastic stuff like all round. So yeah, Steve McQueen comes in at number 2. Okay, but now at number 1 I've got Kate Bush and The Hounds of Love here. So this is just another really remarkable album. I think she really needed this album to kind of I guess kind of like prove herself a little bit. Like her last album, The Dreaming, was a bit of a flop, but this one here, it's completely self-produced, this album, and I think she plays most of the instruments like on here, or certainly like sort of like she handles all the kind of production work and the kind of like the synthesizers and like everything like all like this album, and it's just an absolute triumph. The first side is 5 songs, 4 of them were singles, and all of them are brilliant tracks. And then the second side is the Ninth Wave, which is a kind of suite of songs which tells this very kind of vivid sort of tale like of like someone being kind of like sort of like abandoned like at like sea kind of thing, and this kind of and they're kind of drifting like in and out like of consciousness and that. It's just an absolutely stunning side of music there. So all round, this is a bloody brilliant album here, and was easily like my number 1 choice. Okay, so that's become to the end of this video. Ranked all 31 albums that I own released in 1985. So yes, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Like, if there was any ones I left off, like which you think that I would be really into, please do leave them down below. Like please do leave them down below. Like in the comments. I always kind of look and see and like take any suggestions like kind of like on board. So yeah, and also like let me know what some of your favourite albums were from 1985. And yes, I'll see you all next time for the next video. Goodbye.